Thank you for listening to Light of the Vedas. This is your host, Sri Sachinandan Das. In our previous episode, we discussed how the great sage Vyasa divided the Vedas. He wrote down the Puranas and created the Mahabharata, sort of packaging the Vedic wisdom in the form of entertainment, beautiful and wonderful stories which awe and inspire people and teach them the higher principles of life. He also wrote down the Vedanta Sutra, which is a commentary upon the Upanishads, very logical and concise presentation on what is the absolute truth. And he established the Vedic schools or shakas to disseminate this transcendental knowledge within human society, along with a lifestyle which supports this quest for enlightenment. And then even though after doing this, according to the principles of the Vedas, he still wasn't feeling satisfied. He felt like something was missing. And he was kind of contemplating within himself. He was there in Badrik Ashram, which is his holy place in the Himalayas. It's still there. Many people visit Badrik Ashram. It's high up there in the various, amidst the beautiful valleys of the sacred rivers that flow through the Himalayas. And so there he was sitting by the river Saraswati, and he was thinking within himself, why am I dissatisfied? And he came to the realization, it may be because I didn't emphasize Bhagavat Dharma, or directly hearing and chanting about the glories of Vishnu, or the incarnations of God within the world, and the many miraculous things that have happened with God and His devotees. And I didn't emphasize the chanting of the names of God and the focus of the consciousness upon Him as the highest Dharma. And so Dharma means the nature of something. For example, the Dharma of water is to be wet, or the Dharma of fire is to give heat and light. And so the Dharma of the soul is to have a relationship with God. And Bhagavat is a word referring to the Supreme Lord, or the Absolute Truth, in a personal sense. Bhaga in Sanskrit means an opulence. There's beauty, there's strength, there's wealth, there's fame, there's renunciation. So all of these different things are called bhagas. And so one who possesses bhagas in full is known as a bhagavan. The suffix avan means like you possess something completely. So bhagavan means someone who possesses all the totality of opulences. In fact, the philosophical idea behind this is that all of the opulences that we possess, for example, you see someone who's famous, or you see someone who's wealthy or strong, powerful, but someone who's very beautiful, like perhaps like a model or an actor or actress who is extremely beautiful and captures everyone's attention. Like that model walks into a room and everyone stops and just has to see, just watch, sort of overwhelmed by that beauty. So that beauty is one little spark of sort of the totality of universal beauty. And that universal beauty is one spark of the totality of the beauty of God, which and because he's the possessor of all of these opulences in full, therefore he's known as Bhagavan. Another famous book is the Bhagavad Gita. It's the same principle. It means the song or the Gita of Bhagavat. It's directly the words of Bhagavan. In that case, Krishna. And so Vedavyas, or Vyasadeva, the great sage, after dividing the Vedas, he was feeling that this very essential aspect of Vedic literature, this kind of highest understanding of what is the absolute truth, namely that the absolute truth is a person, and that's God, and he has a name, and he has qualities and personality and a form, various activities. These things I didn't present so clearly. And so right when he was thinking this, then sort of, immediately appeared the great Rishi Narada. And Narada is one of the main characters within the Vedic literature, especially the Puranas. He's kind of like a transcendental, mystical, wandering guru, and he's like enlightens the universe. In fact, he's not a human being, he's a Devarshi, he's a god, he has the body of a god, and yet he's a rishi, or a great sage. And his body is completely spiritual, meaning he can move all throughout the universe, and he's unchecked by the laws of nature. And he can even leave the universe itself and enter into the spiritual realm and then come back to the universe. There's nothing that checks him. He's a liberated soul who exists on a spiritual platform, and yet he wanders throughout the universe enlightening people. And he has a very particular, he looks in a particular way. He's depicted as having his hair sort of, he has long hair of a rishi or a sage or a yogi in the forest, and it's tied up onto the top of his head. And he always carries with him musical instruments, specifically the veena, if you've seen this kind of large Indian instrument like a sitar almost. And he carries it on his shoulder. It's not a regular veena. It was given to him by God himself. And when he plucks the veena and plays the sort of like the veena, it creates a kind of a harmonious background sound, and usually it's someone will use it to accompany their singing. And so he strums the veena and he sings the names of God, Radhika Raman, and he plays the veena, and the veena actually plays the names of God. It doesn't just play musical notes; it actually plays the names of God, transcendental, powerful mantras. And meanwhile, then he sings his own songs on top of that. And so in this way, he wanders around the universe sort of steeped in the understanding of God and in his name and qualities and activities. And so he approaches Vyasadeva, and he immediately, Vyasadeva offers him all respect, and Narada is his guru. And so there in Bhadyakashram, Narada receives him and offers him the appropriate worship. And then they sit down together, and Vyasadeva asks him, you know everything. Not only can you travel throughout the material and spiritual world, but you know what's in the hearts of men. You can actually know exactly what they're thinking and what their emotional state is and what's going on with them. And so can you please tell me, please explain to me, why am I dissatisfied? And essentially Narada confirms that his own doubt, that you have not clearly described the qualities of the Supreme Lord. And by the Supreme Lord, I mean Vishnu, or Krishna, is the one transcendent God who exists beyond nature, and of which the soul is a part and parcel of this Supreme Lord, and eternally a servant of the Supreme Lord. And so he essentially tells him that you're not satisfied because you really didn't take kind of the essence of the Vedic literature and then present it in a very clear, concise way. You sort of missed the point. What you have to do is you have to find that very core teaching of the Vedas, that most luminous aspect, or that most prominent part, which is sort of the source of all the knowledge and beauty within the Vedas, and then just present it in a very clear and powerful way. And whereas in many religious traditions have an understanding of God, the Vedas have a very clear conception of God. It's a very sort of, and it's almost like God's phone number is given, his address is given, what he looks like is given, what the activities of the spiritual realm or heaven, what they are, and also his personality is described in detail, what he's like, and how he interacts with others. And so this is perhaps, the greatest gift that's within the Vedas, is that it has this very, very powerful presentation of who God is. And this is also very esoteric knowledge. It's considered rahasyam uttamam. It's the highest form of secret. It's kind of like you have within the Vedic literature, Brahman is understood first to be sort of like the transcendental light of bliss, which anyone who enters into deep meditation and strictly practices austerity and develops knowledge in any particular religious tradition can have a realization of that transcendental light, that light of Brahman, or the Brahmajyoti, and can experience that oneself is part of that light, and that the universe itself is an emanation from that light, and that everything is ultimately Brahman. And this is considered rahasyam. It's a secret. It exists beyond material experience. It's almost like the material world itself, everything we experience in terms of, earth, air, fire, water, our own physical bodies, our relationships with the bodies of others. All of this is considered yoga maya samavrata. It's like a curtain which covers reality for what it is. And reality is that Everything is the absolute truth. And so that realization of Brahman, and that I am Brahman, and that everything is Brahman, this is essentially like the beginning realization of what the absolute truth is. And just as the sun, you may see the sunlight is shining everywhere, and that light is kind of emanating around everything and through everything, sustaining everything. So some of that light of Brahman is all pervading within the universe. And yet you can actually have a closer understanding of the source of that light. If you look up in the sky and you see the sun globe itself, the origin of that light. So this is then a more secret understanding of what the absolute truth is, a more intimate, something which is sort of like one must qualify oneself to experience that revelation and go deeper. And that's called Parabrahman, or the higher Brahman, and it refers to God within the heart. Within all living entities. And then finally, the closest, sort of like most intimate, most powerful understanding of the absolute truth is if you were to, instead of just looking up and seeing that, quarter-sized globe up in the sky, that fiery, luminous, brilliant ball, you were to actually fly there. And perhaps on the astral realm or the realm of the gods, you were to experience the sun god himself. And greet him and sit down and talk with him and actually deal with his personality. So this would be considered the highest form of revelation of the absolute truth. And so within the Vedas, that information is given. Whereas Vyasadeva, the system he's given, it's kind of like leading people gradually upwards towards that. And it's even sort of encouraging them how to purify their material existence, their worldly existence, by indulging their desires in a way which is religious or pious, and in this way gradually uplifting them. What Narada is saying is that you have to just, clearly present what the highest form of the absolute truth is, and then your whole project will be complete. And not only that, but if you don't, there's a sense in which, because you've encouraged people to perform material activities or sensuous activities in a pious way, they may take that to be the absolute truth in itself. Like they may think that a pious form of materialism is all in all. And if that's the case, then they may also be degraded and led into all sorts of materialistic, ritualistic sacrifices, such as animal slaughter, animal sacrifices, blood sacrifices, and things like this. They may take materialistic rituals to be sort of the path of life, and in this way they may miss the absolute truth. So you really have to clearly present what the absolute truth is in all these different stages, both as Brahman and both as Parabrahman or Paramatma within the heart, and then ultimately as the personality of God. And so within the Vedic literature, that personality of God is known as Vishnu and or Krishna, and there's many millions of expansions or incarnations of Krishna. In fact, it's described that it's just like the waves constantly hitting the seashore. So the incarnations of God, or the avatars, they're coming down again and again and again, and sort of crashing into the world, and they're innumerable. You can't even count them all, and they're constantly coming. Of course, they come in a very regulated way, and they're described within the scriptures. And so there's an entire yogic system which is centered around this. And it's called Bhagavat Dharma, or the Dharma, the spiritual practice, which is ultimately the nature of the soul, of meditating upon and glorifying and serving these various incarnations and expansions, and ultimately the Supreme Lord himself. So there's a whole system in which yogis since the beginning of time have meditated upon these avatars or incarnations and their activities, and the activities of great personalities who have been in contact with them throughout history. And so you might have all these yogis, say you have a group of yogis living in the forest, and they'll sit and they'll discuss these activities of God amongst each other. And they'll become so intensely absorbed in it, and it's an extremely purifying experience. It raises the consciousness. And so it's through that hearing and chanting about the glories of God and in the association of other great sages that one becomes completely purified and exalted in consciousness. And so this is a very important path towards enlightenment, perhaps even like you might call the royal road towards enlightenment. And so Narada Muni wants this to be emphasized. And so the Narada Muni, he also tells his own story of how he became Narada Muni, how he became this transcendental personality not bound by the laws of nature, who travels the universe, basically chanting the glories of God. And it's actually this very interesting story of his life. It begins in a previous universal manifestation. The Vedic literatures describe how the universe, it's not linear time, rather it's cyclic. The universe is constantly created and then destroyed. Kind of like the Big Bang, it expands outward and then contracts. So the universe goes through a process of creation and it remains for a long time, and then gradually it is destroyed. And then it remains sort of in a non-created state for a long period of time, for the duration of one universal creation, and then it's created again, and it exists for some time, then it's destroyed. So like this, the universe is constantly expanding and contracting in these cosmic rhythms, and it's aligned with the Creator God. Essentially, there's the supreme transcendent Lord or God known as Vishnu or Krishna. And then there's a secondary creator God, sort of like the Greek idea of the demiurge. He's a god, he's not necessarily on the level of the supreme God. He's not transcendental to matter. In fact, he's a soul just like us, and yet his body, it encompasses essentially the whole universe, and he's able to create the universe continuously. And then when he goes to sleep and what is his nighttime, then the universe for the most part is devastated, and then he awakens and recreates it. When he goes to sleep, it's devastated. He awakens and recreates it. And then at the end of his life, after 100 of his years, then when he dies, then the entire universe is destroyed for a very, very long period of time. It exists in a state of sort of like void, like it's not really being created. Everything is drawn up into the body of Vishnu, essentially. And so, in a previous universal cycle, like you might say in a previous day of Brahma, the one before the one we're experiencing now, then he was existing as a demigod within the heavens. So the Vedic literatures describe that, there's this sort of earthly realm, and above this earthly realm there is a realm of subtle entities and spirits, and especially what are called upadevas. They're not quite on the level of gods, but they're celestial beings. They're kind of like the servants of the gods. The gods being those powerful living entities which assist within the creation and maintenance of the universe. Gods such as the god of the sun, or the god of fire, the god of the wind. So these are called karma devatas. They're very powerful gods who actually control certain aspects of nature. But then beneath them, there's all sorts of supernatural beings on all different levels. And so one of those types of beings, they're called Gandharvas. And they are essentially celestial musicians. They're entertainers. And they entertain the gods. It's like, when you go into a rich man's kingdom or in his castle or something, there'll be professional musicians and dancers. So within the celestial realm, these are known as Gandharvas and Apsaras. And in a previous universal creation, Narada Muni was a Gandharva or a celestial musician by the name of Upabarhana. And so he was kind of like a rock star, like super, very, very handsome, all these different women surrounding him all the time. You see people like Justin Bieber or something like that, like very handsome, very famous, popular, wealthy, and just women all over the place screaming his name, or like Elvis, right? And so this celestial musician, Upabarhana, he was invited by the gods and great celestial rishis to a worship ceremony where they were chanting the name of God and sort of absorbed in spiritual worship. And he was supposed to participate in that. Kind of like if a rock star were invited to a church or something and is supposed to be singing in a choir or something like that. But instead he was singing songs to the gods, sort of like singing almost like materialistic songs. It's kind of like if Justin Bieber or something were invited to sing in a church choir, and then he was caught behind the building singing sort of like his love songs to different women and stuff like that. So these different celestial sages, they considered that to be kind of offensive. Here he is sitting down with all these girls and flirting with them and singing these kind of like mundane songs. And so he was cursed. And the curse of these great sages, they always end up turning out for the better. Like usually they're actually a blessing in disguise. And this was the case. So he was cursed that, you're so proud of your beauty and your ability and your musicianship. So we curse you to take the birth in the human realm as the son of a maidservant, or like a maid. This is like basically a very humble woman sort of living in another man's home and doing menial jobs like washing the floor or cleaning the clothes, and you'll be born to her, right? And there's no mention of his father at all. So he was born the son of a maidservant, but she was actually the maidservant of a brahmana. She was living in the home of a priest, basically, like a very an exalted religious personality. And usually in these homes they're schools, right? Like the Brahmin priest, he'll have many different students that come and live with him, and he'll teach them the Vedas. And so she was serving in that household, and this young boy, who was previously Upabarhana, the celestial rock star, he took birth as her son. And he would assist his mother in performing various tasks. And then one day, a group of sages arrived and were staying for like extended guests, live-in guests, at the home of this brahmana for many months. At least 4 months. Traditionally in India, there's the rainy season or the monsoon season, and it rains so bad that everything, the roads become rivers of mud, and nobody can really move anywhere, go anywhere, especially in ancient times. So the tradition was during the 4 months of the rainy season, or the monsoon, then people kind of stuck in one place. Usually they'd go to a holy place or something, and then just live there and perform austerities and meditate and things like that during that time while it's, while the rain is pouring down everywhere. And so these great sages, they came and stayed at the home of this Brahmin. And so the young, sort of Narada Muni, the son of the maidservant, he was assisting them. And his mother sort of gave him the task of taking care of them. And she was kind of like, she's doing her regular duties, for sort of, which included farm work like milking cows and stuff like that. And then he was running there assisting the sages. And by doing that, he really got their association. And these weren't regular sages. These were individuals performing this Bhagavat Dharma. They're constantly chanting about glorifying Vishnu and telling about the different stories of the avatars, chanting various names and singing songs, and, sort of like very humble, saintly individuals absorbed in this deep meditation upon the activities of the Absolute Truth. And so Narada was hearing all this, and he was, serving them in a very humble way as a young boy. He's only like about 4 or 5 years old. And they were very kind to him. And they gave him the remnants of their foodstuffs, which traditionally eating the remnants of a great saintly person's food is very purifying. Like basically eating with them and eating the things that they were eating. And so in this way, he became very purified. And then after the rainy season was over, these great saints, they left, and they also initiated him into spiritual knowledge. Even though he's a young boy, they saw he was so sincere, like he wasn't like other little boys who just kind of want to run around and play and stuff. He was like like a spiritual seeker. And so they blessed him with spiritual knowledge and introduced him to the process of Bhagavat Dharma. And then shortly after that, his mother, while milking a cow, she was bitten by a snake and she died. And so this young boy decided to just take up this Bhagavat Dharma seriously and begin wandering the world. In fact, within the Bhagavad Purana, it describes in detail, like he passed through all these forests and cities and places. And eventually he found this secluded forest where there was a banyan tree, and there's no one around for hundreds of miles, right? This is very, very secluded out in the mountains. And he sat and began meditating, and he began meditating upon the Supreme Lord, and immediately he had a vision of God. Right there, this is like an extremely powerful experience in his meditation, and he's still just a young boy. And then that vision, he was filled with ecstasy and revelation, and then the vision disappeared. So then he kind of like became a little disturbed, like, oh no, it vanished. And he stood up and was kind of walking around, and then he heard a voice. It was the voice of God, and told him that I have shown you my form, like I've given you a little taste, but I'm not going to give you any more, at least for this lifetime. I only gave you this taste in order to inspire you to find me, to really develop a strong desire for me. And this is, and the more that you desire me, the more that you will become free of material desires. The more you'll become free of material illusion. Essentially, you'll leave Maya, or you'll leave the illusion about what reality is behind, and you'll attain enlightenment. And so I've just kind of sparked this desire within you, and now it will become a flame, and you'll become driven by this desire. And then it happened. And so Narada became extremely devoted to the path of Bhagavat Dharma, constantly chanting the glories of God and sort of just wandering the world, absorbed in his own meditation, to the extent where he was sort of like not even paying attention to the world around him. You see this within the Vedic tradition. A lot of the saints, they become almost like they don't even know what's going on. They're just so deeply absorbed in meditation and in glorification that it's like they're moving in the world but not of the world, right? As Jesus Christ said. And so, and this was the case with him. And then he died. He left his body. And because he was so spiritually purified and absorbed, then he describes that just like lightning and light, it happens simultaneously. So immediately upon death, he attained a spiritual body, and he was welcomed into the kingdom of God. And he was there, and then when the time, the universe in the meantime went through a process of devastation. The end of Brahma's day had happened, and he went to sleep, and the universe had been destroyed. And then Brahma awoke, and he began creation again. And that is this day. We're considered to be living sort of halfway through Brahma's day. It's like, lunchtime or so, in the day of Brahma. And at the time of creation, then, of this particular day of Brahma, the one we're living in now, he entered into the body of Brahma and came out as his son. Of course, he has a purely spiritual body beyond material energy, and yet he took birth, in a sense, from Brahma. At the time of creation, Brahma created many what are called Prajapatis, or great saintly sages, which have various tasks within the universe. And, usually they have to deal with populating the universe or constructing the universe. And Narada took birth as one of them. They're all his brothers. And yet he is completely spiritual, and his job is essentially to travel within the world and establish Bhagavat Dharma. And so this is what he advises Vyasadeva to do. And he's actually considered an incarnation of bhakti, or devotion. And he arose directly from the heart of Brahma. And so really he's got an important task. It's kind of like one of the central purposes of creation is to reestablish the soul's relationship with the absolute truth in the form of worship and reverence and devotion. And so that's what he does. And he basically travels the universe doing that. And so he urged Vyasadeva to emphasize this Bhagavat Dharma, which is the very path that purified him and exalted him, and the very path that he is almost like a personal representation of. And so you can imagine that, for so long there's this process of these sages sort of glorifying and talking about all these activities of the Supreme Lord and all these avatars of Vishnu that enter into the world. And so Vyasadeva decided, okay, I'm going to record all that. I'm going to write it all down, right? All these different stories that they're absorbed in, and all these different songs and prayers and everything. I'm going to actually record it into one book. And then that book is called the Bhagavat Purana. And even when he begins the Bhagavat Purana, or the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srimad means something that's very beautiful, like it's filled with all beauty. And Bhagavatam is kind of like a nickname for the Bhagavat Purana. And so this Srimad Bhagavatam, when he begins it, he writes it in such a way that it's clear that this is his personal commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. And again, the Vedanta Sutra is that aspect of the Vedic literature which deals specifically with the absolute truth. And so this, what is Brahman? And so this Bhagavatam, or Srimad Bhagavatam, is really his elaboration on what is Brahman, which the main point of the Upanishads. or that aspect of the Vedas which is dealing with spiritual truth. So in this way, the Bhagavat Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam, is really the ripened fruit of the Vedic literatures. And it's the essence of what Vyasadeva is trying to give. And it's an incredibly powerful literature. And its specific quality is that just by hearing it, Shrinvatam Svakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridendasta Hyabhadanani Vidunati Suhritsatam. Just by hearing that literature, then it purifies the heart, and you can directly experience the qualities of Sattva Gun, or pure consciousness arising within you. And it's completely pure. And so it has a special place within the Vedic literature due to its purity and its power to influence you, or its power to purify your mind. And this is such an important literature that just as he distributed the various Vedas and the Puranas and these different literatures to his disciples, so he gave this particular literature to his own son. His own son, Sukadeva Goswami, then became the proponent of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he is the main speaker of the Bhagavatam. So in our next episode, we'll discuss who Sukadeva Goswami is and how he came to speak this great literature. So thank you very much for listening. If you found value in this, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, please visit srisachinandana.com/iTunes and leave a positive review. Thank you again, and we hope you'll join us next time on Light of the Vedas.